The Boston Marathon is an iconic race and something of a holy grail for many runners. Liz and I have both run Boston. There's something special about earning your place and lining up in Hopkinton with people who are not just your running tribe, but actually a very special subgroup of your running tribe. And I guess some people would say, a bit elite subgroup because you got to qualify to get in. It's not really the people's marathon. It's the crazy, devoted runners marathon. Anyone who's done it, many who haven't, know all about it. The deceptive start at downhill to begin with. It smashes your legs for later. The Wellesley Schoolgirls Scream Tunnel. Who could forget that? The Newton Hills, my particular favorite, the Newton Hills, culminating in Heartbreak Hill. The sit-go sign with 1 mile to go. If you can get to the sit-go sign, you can make it to the end. And after the underpass, the two most famous turns in marathon running anywhere in the world. Right on Hereford, left on Boylston Street. And that's just before the finish. You got about 800, 600 meters to run to the end then. I've run Boston 6 times. Now, I've never really mastered it. I'm going to have another go later on, I think, maybe next year. The two main characters in today's book also had their own very particular challenges with the Boston Marathon. And those particular challenges were about 60 years apart. More on that soon. Hi, and welcome to the Running Book Reviews podcast, where we review books written for runners, about runners, and by runners to help you decide if you'd like to read the book for yourself. We also hope that listening to us chat about running can help keep you motivated about your own running, or maybe inspire you to try something new. My name's Alan, and with my co-host Liz, we're going to talk with author Jeff Recker about his book, The Humiliation Tour.
The Humiliation Tour is a running-themed fiction novel that could have probably been 2 novels. There are 2 separate stories, one starting in 1933 during the Great Depression, and the other starting in 1993, and both are related in an unexpected way towards the end of the book. Both stories feature a young man that discovers running, and this changes his life in some way. Both stories are centered around running, and both involve lots of humiliation, hence the title. Good thing that these things didn't happen during the era of smartphones and social media. A little bit about Jeff. As a young kid, Jeff suffered acute asthma attacks, and on a doctor's advice, his family moved from Pittsburgh to Phoenix for a drier climate. The asthma persisted for many years, and his early memories were that of his friends playing outside while he stayed inside, fostering creativity by writing short stories. The arid climate of Arizona worked to help cure his asthma, and he went on to be a very active young adult, obsessed with lifting weights and playing varsity baseball at Moon Valley High School. Labeled a jock, little academic expectation was placed on him until his creative writing teacher took notice of his assignments and encouraged him to explore that passion. So he went on to study business at the University of Arizona in Tucson. At 27, he became a runner with the only goal of losing weight, but his self-admitted OCD kicked in. I think all of us runners are a little OCD. To date, he's run over 30 marathons, including the Boston Marathon on 5 occasions, and has competed in 8 Ironman Triathlons. Okay, let that sink in, because that is 8 times riding your bike 180 kilometers. And all this from the kid with asthma whom the doctor said would never do anything athletic. Writing continues to be Jeff's creative outlet in adulthood. He's authored articles for Colorado Runner magazine and other publications. The idea of writing the Humiliation Tour came to him after hearing about a very humiliating event that a friend experienced while running in the Las Vegas Marathon. Many years later, when COVID hit and the country shut down, he found himself laid off with a lot of time on his hands and began that journey. Jeff currently lives and plays in Grand Junction, Colorado with his wife, 2 children, and 3 rescue dogs. So welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Liz, and nice to meet you, Alan. I'm so happy to be here. It's truly my pleasure.
And so when we were chit-chatting before, you actually didn't even mention the rescue dogs. There's 3 of them.
Yeah, they all run. They're my running partners now.
Oh.
So we run as a family, except for my kids. They hate to run.
Maybe one day. It's got to grow on them a little bit. Once they're like 27, they'll probably get into it. Let's get into the book. So we'll just start with how did you decide to write this book?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very interesting question, actually. As you mentioned in my bio, so when COVID shut everything down, I lost my job and I moped around the house for a long while. I think my wife threatened to kill me if I didn't snap out of it. So no, she never did say that, but I suspect she considered it. What she did do, however, is tell me not to let this time go to waste. And I really took that to heart. I'd had this idea in my head for many years. I suppose that as we age, we all become a bit nostalgic. And personally, I love to think about the journey that we're all on, the things that shape us. Much of that happens in adolescence, Liz, particularly those later years in adolescence when we're no longer kids, but we're not quite grown-ups either. So there's a lot of pressure on us to, follow a certain path in life, a lot of expectations. We do a lot of stupid things. We learn hard lessons. Trying to figure it out. So I knew I wanted to write a coming of age story. And of course, it was always going to be about running. Running was always going to be the theme. I also wanted to invoke about every emotion possible because I think at that age you experience about every emotion possible and you can't make sense of half of them. At times this book is completely over the top ridiculous. Other times it's very poignant, full of angst. Still other times it's a heartfelt love story. But in the end, I think it satisfied my intention. So yeah, I had this idea, but really the COVID shutdown afforded me the time to really get it started. So I guess you could say this was my COVID baby.
And did your wife know that you kind of had that idea of writing a book one day? Like, did she know that before the whole COVID shutdown and all of that happened?
Yeah, so she did. My wife, she knows that writing really grounds me, especially during anxious times. And when else was I going to have the time to really uh, jump on writing a novel? COVID was the perfect opportunity for that. I think I was out of work for about 5 months. And now I didn't write the entire novel in 5 months. That took about 14 months, but I certainly wrote the bones of it. It wasn't a bad time in my life. I would wake up in the mornings and write for about 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours at times. I feel like that's when I'm most fertile with thought. In the afternoon, I would either run or bike. If I was on my bike, I'd be out there for a few hours and I would basically digest what I had just written, think about ways how I could make it better, the next steps and characters I might want to introduce. And then in the afternoon, I was usually lounging in the pool with a beer in hand and thinking about, the next day's write. So I did that for about 5 months straight because there was really nothing else that I could do at that time. But she's always encouraged me to write. I just thought that it was the perfect time to move forward with that.
Did you have an editor or did somebody help you kind of craft it afterwards? Because it looks extremely well sort of crafted.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I did hire an editor. The path to publication was pretty interesting. I knew nothing about the publication industry, before writing the novel. All I knew is one day I woke up and I had a manuscript in hand. And I was pretty excited about it. But then the next question is, well, now what? So I literally was on Google trying to figure out like what's the path to publication, and everybody told me, well, you need an agent. So I started blindly sending out query letters to agents, which is a tough road. Oddly enough, I was actually able to land an agent in about 2 weeks, which I hear is
Oh,
pretty
wow.
unheard of. And at that time, the book was still unedited. And my agent worked with me a bit, but moreover, he sent the manuscript out to his contacts at some pretty big publishing houses, and we got some nice feedback. We got some nibbles, but in the end, we really didn't get any bites. So my agent sat on it for for about 4 or 5 months, and I felt that maybe he had exhausted his
network.
His network. So we decided. I actually did something that I guess authors never are supposed to do, and that was I parted ways with my agent. And I decided to strike out on my own. And he gave me some advice. He says, Jeff, this is I really love this novel, but you might have to take the path of self-publishing. So at that point, I decided to find an editor because I knew that was, part of the process. And I found a great editor, but editors they can do a lot for you or they can do a little for you based on what you tell them you want. And I didn't want this editor to change the voice. I didn't want him to move things around. All I wanted him was basically to correct grammar or any obvious errors. And that was the agreement that I had with them. So yeah, I did find an editor. I had it edited. And then I started reaching out to publishers on my own. And eventually I found, there was a book called The Slummer by Boxer Press.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, written by Jeffrey Simpson. And I reached out to Jeff because on the cover of his book, he has a quote from Colorado Runner magazine, who I've written some articles for. So I just reached out to him and I asked him about the path to self-publication, or publishing. So he was wonderful and he gave me some great advice. And then I just kind of asked him, I said, hey, would you be interested in publishing my book? And at first he wasn't. He was very kind in giving me advice though. But eventually he asked to read the manuscript and I sent that over to him. And shortly thereafter, he got back to me and he said, I absolutely want to publish this book. So that was my road to publication. So I owed Jeff a great deal of gratitude and really happy that we were able to meet through those means. But yes, I did have an editor. He did some great work for me, gave me some great advice, didn't change the voice, didn't change anything about it, but basically just, looked over the grammar and that was about it.
Yeah, I noticed that Jeffrey Simpson, he wrote a little blurb at the beginning.
Sure.
You actually have quite a few people, I think, that read the book beforehand and, they wrote little reviews at the beginning, which is,
including Bill Rogers.
Yeah. I was pretty excited to get Bill's endorsement. I've got to tell you. He's always been, one of my running heroes.
That's amazing. You open the cover and there's some, some well-known, I think, names in there, just the first page of the book. So that's pretty impressive.
I think the book is being very well received so far. So I'm very excited about that.
So we don't want to give too much of the story away, but obviously, we need to give some sort of context and
sure.
It's clearly based around running and some personalities. The main modern day hero of the story is a young guy called Billy Ball. And one of the things that happens to him at the start is he's a very good runner at the school level, but he has quite a marked equipment failure where he loses his shorts during the finish round the corner on a cactus while trying to hotly contest the lead of a race. But you actually mentioned in the acknowledgements at the end, so I'm leaping from the front of the book to the back of the book. At the end, you said this was inspired by an actual event.
Yes.
So well, tell us about that. Tell us about your the inspiration and how did this all come about?
The character of Billy Ball was really taken from an incident that one of my good friends experienced while running the Las Vegas Marathon. And this was some time ago. It was probably 15, 16 years ago. And my friend, he was a pretty talented runner. He was running with the lead woman and, right next to her. And it was a very, very windy day. And my friend's very superstitious and he was wearing some old shorts of his that he'd worn in virtually every race, I think, that he'd been in, which was to say hundreds of races. And on this extremely windy day, the crotch ripped out of his
Oh
shorts.
no.
Yes. So so the flaps of his shorts were taking off in the wind and exposing him to anybody who happened to be around. Now, the Las Vegas Marathon, it was sparsely populated. It takes place out in the desert, or at least it did at the time. Very different venue now. So normally that wouldn't have been a problem. However, there was a television crew that was following the lead woman.
Ah,
And
yes, of
Oh
course.
no.
yeah, they had a camera on her, and I imagine him. So, I imagine somewhere in their vault is a clip of my friend's privates. Um,
Next to the lead woman as she runs in.
Mm-hmm.
so it was a hilarious incident, and he shared that with me, and all of us, of course, after the race. And I told him at the time, I said, I've got this idea for this book, and I have had this idea in my head for a very long time, and I absolutely need to borrow that incident as as one of the scenes. I didn't know at the time that would be the lead character in the novel, but it became the lead. It became the really the opening kind of scene, which propels the book.
Yeah,
And
sort of the kickoff point, really, isn't it?
point for the Humiliation Tour. Great question, though, Alan. Thanks. I'm not gonna tell you who my friend's name is, because I don't know if you would appreciate that.
I was tempted to ask you because I actually read the guy's name and I thought, oh, that's quite appropriate.
Oh yes, correct.
Yeah,
he is. We do list him in the acknowledgments. So,
but I think there's a few people listed in the acknowledgments, so nobody will know which one it is. So he's kind of safe. His the incident will
Nice,
everybody will
famous.
have to guess. Well, I guess, but I don't know if you want to be famous for that. You see what happened to the main character of the book throughout the book?
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know. I think that's a lesson to all of us. I guess where did you get the inspiration for some of the other characters? Because you have somebody named Christmas Day, which is the rival of the main character on the running scene. But I mean, what made you think to name this guy Christmas Day? I mean, what? And he never got teased. He's like the jock in the book. He's like can do no wrong kind of thing. But he's got a name that any parent knows not to name their kid that, because I mean, they're just going to get teased in school, but not this guy. This guy was like God. What gave you the idea to name him Christmas Day?
Christmas Day. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, that's a pretty silly name. There is there's a background story on that. When I first started, looking at writing this novel, I wasn't going to write a comedic book. I was trying to write like this story that had a lot of history to it, and it was going to center around a mining town. And there's a town, an old abandoned town, just outside of Tucson, called the Christmas Mine. And the main character was going to be from Christmas, and so it was just a name that kind of popped into my head. I thought it was so over the top and ridiculous that I actually decided to go with it, because again, how could you possibly, be the protagonist in a novel that somebody is so perfect as Christmas Day, a 4-time state champion? Yeah, so Christmas Day was just kind of a silly name. Again, it was just completely over the top. But I wanted the antagonist in this to be such an impossible figure to measure up to, that, how can you, when your name is Christmas Day, the media is going to love you. Everybody's going to love you. You're basically going to have your own fan club. And, this poor Billy Ball is trying to beat this guy in a race. And Christmas Day is not just a great runner. He is the greatest runner in all of Arizona. So it just stacked the deck a little bit more against Billy Ball. And that's why I decided to just go with the name, because it was just so over the top that I thought it was funny. And I play with names throughout the novel. That's certainly not the only one, but half the time that I would, I'd have to introduce a character, and I would just pull a name out of a hat, and other times I thought pretty hard about who or what I wanted to name the character.
Yeah, I felt really bad for Billy. It just seemed like the world was against him after that day. And some things, I guess, you can say, like you said, in I think it was before we even started recording, we, sometimes we do things in our youth that we're not proud of, but at the same time, like, so many things happened to him and he got so much blame for stuff that I feel like the poor guy should have been, cut a little bit of slack.
Yeah, so and I agree, and I think if you read the book, that's one of the reasons why you feel for Billy, because he gets caught up in this web of bureaucracy around an event, and he just sends him spiraling down this awful rabbit hole that nobody saw coming, that he can't seem to climb out of. I think, like, in our youth, we don't have the influence, we don't have a lot of the tools to really know how to climb out of these holes, and we're kind of left to wherever the wind blows us. And Billy certainly gets himself into some deep trouble, and he gets
true.
on this unexpected path that he didn't see coming, his parents didn't see coming, nobody saw coming, and his world kind of blows up on him because of what happens to him initially.
Yeah, I found when I was reading the book, and he's talking with the police about an incident, and the police asking him some sort of leading questions to get him to sort of admit his guilt when he isn't even guilty. And he sort of says, "Oh, yeah, I guess I can." And you're in the background reading the book going, "No, don't say that. Don't say that. You're incriminating yourself when you don't need to." But it's typical of what, a nervous adolescent or young adult, might do when faced with the authority. And of course, this just digs it the hole deeper for him.
The incident is so over the top and so ridiculous that not even his parents take it seriously at first, until the law gets involved and he's actually charged with a felony, which again continues to send him down this just terrible rabbit hole.
He loses his scholarships. That's what I was thinking of. That's the word I was thinking of.
Well,
He loses
his
scholarship.
yeah, he wasn't on scholarship yet, but he had offers, and he
All the
ends up
colleges
losing them.
lose interest in him because there's a question of his character.
Yeah.
Poor
And
guy.
yeah, so there's one point, certainly he's vying for the state championship, and so he's on top of the world. There's a lot of colleges that are interested in him, and you fast forward a few months later, and he's likely not going to college, but taking a different path altogether, and which is fine. But I think when you're a kid, you're certainly at that age. There's, as I mentioned, there's a lot of expectations that are put on you, and the road it often looks very narrow until it doesn't. And and I think with Billy, he gets put down, he gets put on this path that he doesn't know how to escape from, and it's a fine path in the end, but it's just something that was completely unexpected.
I find also his parents were like very typical of the 90s, because it was like time for him to go and meet his attorney, and they were just like, "Oh yeah, well, you have a car, you go on your own." Like, I feel like nowadays, I mean, the parents would be in that attorney's office with the child,
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it was, we would make mistakes and then we would have to like find our way out of them.
Yeah. And I think that came from Billy's dad too, a little bit. His mom would typically dote on him, but his dad was anxious for him to grow up and be a man. And so that's one reason why he didn't want to accompany him down to the courthouse. So
Mhm.
so he wanted him to kind of strike out on his own and grow up a little bit. So he certainly did that, but it didn't have the best result, did it? So
what we see at the start of the book is basically a promising young runner spiraling out of control in almost unbelievable circumstances, amazing circumstances of misfortune. And I guess the saying I always come to is, if you're in a hole and it's really deep, the first thing you should do is stop digging. But it seems he keeps digging and his hole gets deeper and deeper. And that's sort of one of the themes of the first part of the story. And in parallel, we're getting another story at the same time, based not in the 1990s, but in the 1930s. And our first experience with, well, there's another equipment failure incident which parallels it in terms of, our other hero trying to do a robbery and botching the whole thing up because I guess he's just fallen on hard times, running away, losing his trousers while he's wriggling his trousers off to get out of the grasp of somebody, and then running half naked down the street and eventually getting caught and ending up doing work for a benefactor who is in the 30s at the time of Prohibition, is a bootlegger.
Yes.
Because he gets in with the mafia, basically, almost.
Yeah, Patty O'Donnell. I loved writing his character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was actually interesting because you kind of hinted, I think, that he may have been homosexual, but then you put him in the 30s.
Yeah.
I feel like he would have been easier for him in the 90s, but what made you decide to put him in the 30s?
Well, he was so that's a great question, and really to answer it, you have to. The reason why I actually developed that entire storyline was because I feel like we're all connected to our past. I think that both physically and intellectually, we're connected in some ways to our genealogy and to our ancestors and such. And when I started out to write this novel, I really felt like I just had some exploration to do of my roots. I've always been interested in things that shape us, again, like our character, our behaviors, our gifts, both physically and intellectually. And, basically the nature versus nurture topic. For this, I chose that era because of, quite frankly, my parents were born during the Great Depression in Pittsburgh. And I was always really fascinated with, what shaped them, what influenced them when they were growing up. They were born during the Great Depression, but, their formative years were after, but they still grew up in the shadow of the Great Depression, and they were pretty poor. So I started researching what that must have been like to grow up in Pittsburgh and during that time. The Great Depression is one thing, but Prohibition was a whole nother thing, and that played a huge part in the history during that era of Pittsburgh. And I introduced a mob boss named Patty O'Donnell, and I didn't write him to be a homosexual at first. However, it made sense to me because at that time, what could be more humiliating for a mob boss than to be homosexual? Because there was, back in that era, that was something that you didn't come out and admit. So that was a secret that Patty had. But I loved writing his character. I thought he was a lot of fun. He was a very colorful character, and he had a really, really big heart. And he took Jimmy Flynn, who is the great grandfather of Billy Ball. He took him under his wing and really promoted him, uplifted him to a point where he was able to compete in the Boston Marathon back then. So fun character to write.
And our first experience with the Boston Marathon in your book is actually in the 1930s. We get another experience later on, which is more modern. But basically, they've discovered Jimmy's a bit of a runner, the way he escaped from the police originally, and decide to back him to run the Boston Marathon and bet the farm on him winning.
Yes.
Basically, it was kind of cool and pretty shocking to see all the things that they thought would make Jimmy a faster runner in the 1930s.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And how openly they would talk about it. And I think there was a section in the in the book where Jimmy's entering the Boston Marathon, and he's given the person who's entering him into the race, I'll hold my bag of cocaine, I think is, and can you hold these amphetamine tablets for me while I sign the document, or I'll pay my $1 entry fee or whatever it was. I guess all of these things were real.
They were indeed, and this was all part of the the fun of writing the novel was all the research that I did. Because again, I didn't know anything about growing up in Pittsburgh in the 1930s, or I didn't know much about prohibition. I knew some just enough to make me dangerous, right? But performance enhancing drugs were very common even back then. It's just that there wasn't a stigma attached to them, and nobody actually knew. There wasn't a lot of research and to support what they could do. They just knew that they did something. I believe in 1904, the gold medal winner for the Olympic marathon was given strychnine and brandy, and they called it a cocktail. And so he won that race on strychnine and brandy. And so that was kind of an aha moment for me. And I thought it would be a lot of fun to introduce that to the Boston Marathon in the 1930s, because at that time there still, as far as I know, there still were no restrictions on performance enhancing drugs at the time. So yeah, Jimmy Flynn, the character in the 30s there, he was given quite a lot of those before the Boston Marathon, thinking that would be kind of the secret sauce to get him across the finish line first. And without giving anything away, it doesn't exactly work out for him.
No, I feel bad for the guy, because he was, it seems like, when people were nice to him, he just kind of took what they were saying at face value. I guess it's that, he was like young and naive, just like Billy was. He would just take anything people said, oh, this will help you during your run. And so he would take it.
Yeah, at that time in your life when you're a teenager, not you're 18, 19 years old. Again, you're not a kid, but you're not quite a man, and you're influenced very easy by adults, and you think that everybody has your best interest in mind, and perhaps that's not always going to be the case. The funny thing, the irony behind that is, everybody that Jimmy came across actually did have his best interest in mind, but they didn't know either the effects of performance enhancing drugs, and certainly in his case, the amount of those that he took, both before and during the marathon, and what that would do to him. So it's kind of a funny situation, So everybody had his back, but everybody was pretty nice about it.
And the other thing was, there seemed to be no restrictions on betting. It was very unregulated and somewhat crazy.
Yeah, so that's true. That was, again, part of my research. I wanted to know if betting was legal on the marathon back in the day, and I don't know that it was legal per se. I mean, I guess it was, because bookies were common, but everything seemed to be kind of underground. And what's really interesting about that too is you had a lot of people that would come in that were scammers, and they'd take your money for a lottery. So basically, let's say there's 250 people in the race, and you were simply betting on a number, not a person. So you'd hand the bookie your money, however much you wanted to bet, and you'd literally be betting on a number. And if your number came in first, then you won. But half of these bookies would run out of town with everybody's money before the race was even over. So there was a lot of illegal activities going on that front. But yeah, betting was, from what I understand, pretty common at the Boston Marathon in the 30s.
And maybe while we're still on the Boston Marathon, I could ask you about your own experience with the Boston Marathon, just
Sure.
jumping out of the book, because
Yeah.
we see in your bio that, like me, you've done a few Bostons.
Yeah.
How was it for you?
Yeah, Boston's always had a special place in my heart, even as a kid. I didn't even start running until I was about 28 years old. And as Liz pointed out in the bio at the start of the show, I started running to lose weight. But for some reason, running has always intrigued me, and especially the Boston Marathon. I can remember, from my youth, watching the Boston Marathon on TV and just kind of being blown away by it. Later in college, I remember the great duel between Alberto Salazar and Dick Beardsley. and as a college student, I'm glued to the TV, but nobody around me was. Nobody cared about the Boston Marathon, in my dormitory, but me. And I never could understand exactly why that is. I still don't really get it, but somewhere deep within me is this love for running and also the Boston Marathon. On a side note, Dick Beardsley came out to run a local race, and I was helping the race director as Dick's chaperone, and so I got to hang out with Dick for a couple of days, and he actually came to my house for a post-race celebration.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, that was like really, really cool. But my experiences with Boston, I started running, and as soon as I started running, I went big. I wanted to get to the Boston Marathon, and it took me several attempts. I think at the time, I know that the qualifying times, they keep changing and changing. At the time, the qualifying time for me was 3 hours and 10 minutes. I'm not a natural runner. I'm actually, I'm a 200 pound, 6 foot, person. So I'm not a small runner. Running is something that I've really had to work at. And then finally, one day I qualified, and this is going back to, oh my goodness, I think it was 1989 when I first ran it. I might be mistaken, 1990. So that was a highlight. And then, of course, I ran it again a couple years later, ran it with my wife, which was a really special occasion. And then for some reason, I just kind of got out of running the Boston Marathon. I started to focus on triathlon and some other things. I would still run marathons and I'd qualify, but I wouldn't actually run the Boston Marathon for some reason. And at some point later in life, it became really important to me to get back to it because I recognized that this is the greatest running event in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And I ran it 3 years in a row from 2017, 18, and 19. So I ran it during, the perfect storm in 2018.
Yeah.
Alan was there.
Were you there?
Yeah.
I had my best race there ever, I think. Not in terms
That's
of
unbelievable
placement, because again, I have some really fast friends and they're all much thinner than me, and they got very cold, and I got a lot of insulation on me. So the weather didn't really bother me that much. So I really had a really nice race that day. 2019 completely blew up, which was a shame because I think I was trained the best for that day. But yeah, Boston means a lot to me. It always will. And I think I share in the acknowledgement section of the book that, I feel like for runners, all roads lead to Boston. And for many of them, it's the pinnacle of their running experience, of their running life. And that's certainly how it feels to me. And one day I hope to get back to it again. I haven't run it since COVID.
I think also sometimes those Boston qualifiers, even when people don't actually go to Boston, it seems like it's kind of like a benchmark, because you can have I want to go sub 4 hours. I want to go sub 3.5 or sub 3 or whatever. But then there's people that will be like, oh, well, I want to see if I can qualify for Boston, but they may or may not go. It's almost like it's like the benchmark.
It's kind of I'm an unofficial member of the Boston Club if I can run the qualifying time, whether I go or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But, I think it means different things for different people, certainly. My wife's funny. She's much faster than me. She never cared to run Boston. She only ran it 1 year because I asked her to run it with me, and it was kind of crazy. I mean, she was she was seated differently. She was in a wave in front of me. So she had to stop on the course and wait for me for about 5 minutes. And Ashland, I think she stopped and she picked me up there, and then we ran together till the Newton Hills, and that's when she left me. So she went on to run her own race, and I think she placed in the top 100 actually. So she did quite well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was several thousand people back.
Yeah, I have to say that I don't, I'm kind of like your wife. Like I ran it once. Now I tell Alan, like I should do it again. I need to do it in an even year so that I could get the blue shirt because I have the yellow shirt. I did it in 2011. But yeah, it's I guess, when you don't live close by, it's the whole, it's also, the hotel costs and everything else, and you're kind of like, those screaming girls at the Wellesley College. I still have like trauma from that because they were so loud. I felt like my eardrums were gonna fall out.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if you could put a Strava, and I'm sure people do this. I don't Strava myself, but if you could put a Strava on that, I know everybody runs their fastest quarter mile during that section.
It's
Because
actually impressive. You hear them for a long time
through that
before
and out the other end. Yeah.
and a
yeah,
long time after. Yeah. But it's going through the when they're just really close and screaming. I remember just finding that very overwhelming because you can't get away from it and it's just so loud.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, question: when you ran it last, I think the tunnel was only, well, it wasn't really a tunnel. I think that they only had them lined up on one side. If I
Yeah, it's
recall.
true.
Yeah. Back when I first started running it, it was a true tunnel, and they were squeezing in from both sides. So, you know, I
That would
saw
have been
people holding the rears. Yeah, yeah, it was pretty crazy.
I ran it in 2011. I'm not sure if it was a tunnel, but it sounded like a tunnel.
It's a tunnel of noise.
Yeah,
Mhm.
So I think you know, your experience and your love for Boston shows through a little bit in your descriptions of, you know, both Boston sections of your book. And for people who are familiar with Boston, I think it's absolutely fantastic as well. It gives it an extra, over and above an extra bit, because you can imagine the places as you're going through some of the places.
I think it certainly helped that I ran the Boston Marathon prior to writing the novel, because I tried to make it as realistic and as visual as I could, all the way from, you know, being on the starting line and hearing just about every language you could ever imagine of people that are next to you. And you know, it's so exciting to know that this is really kind of the center of the world on this day,
Yeah.
and everybody's coming together for a common good and sharing the same experience.
I always, in terms of the uniformity of the feeling of the people, I always tell a story about one time when I qualified in the first wave, the last corral, but the first wave. So I was quite sort of proud of that. But I was in the very last corral, and I thought, oh, maybe I have the slowest time of this whole wave for qualifying. I'll ask a few people, and I started walking around asking people what their qualifying times were. And it suddenly occurred to me, everybody's qualifying time was within about 10 to 15 seconds of each other.
Wow.
Because there are just so many qualifiers, and they're all placed in speed order at the end of the day. So you're in the corral with all the people who qualified at exactly the same time as you. And there's 1,000 people in the corral, but 1,000 people only covers about 30 seconds of qualifying time, something like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Regardless of what speed you are, you're always going to have company, and you're completely humbled. In 2019, when I blew up very, very early. And at that time, you know, when you blow up early in that race, you're shot out the back of your wave, and then all of a sudden you're actually running alone for a while.
There's a little space till the next wave catches you.
Yeah, and then the next wave starts to catch you, and you're like, oh, I'm in trouble. And you know, and what happened to me in 2019 was, then that wave caught me, and then they spit me out the back too.
Oh no.
Oh yeah,
that was a bad day.
A bad day.
I've had one of those.
That sounds a little like my marathon 2 days ago.
That's part of my own humiliation tour.
So the story in the Humiliation Tour, it's kind of two stories in parallel, but it's set in two small towns. The town of Wilmerding, and I checked, and I think maybe you said in your acknowledgements, these are real towns.
Yeah.
These are not fictitious towns. The town of Wilmerding, I was wondering what you were talking about when you were referring to all the people as dingers in the book. I was thinking, why is he using dingers? What does that mean? And I realized it's Wilmerding. So it's people from Wilmerding.
Yes.
Or Wilmerding. I don't know how to pronounce it. So that's in Pennsylvania, I guess.
It is. Yeah.
And then there's the town of Oracle. Seems to be a little mining town, a copper mining town, is it? In Arizona.
Yeah, indeed.
Tell us about the background stories around these.
Yeah, sure. So really interesting stories behind these. Well, first of all, let me start with Oracle. So Oracle, it lies just on the north side of Mount Lemmon, which is really the large mountain that when you live in Tucson, you look up at every day. It's very prominent and it's a beautiful mountain. So Oracle is about 30 minutes to the north of Tucson on the north side of this mountain. And it's a quaint little town, has a rich history in mining. The reason why I chose that is really kind of selfish. It was there that I ran my first 10K back in 1989. You know, I wanted the setting to be in a small town. I didn't want the book to get too convoluted with the just the aspects of a big city. I wanted it to be kind of a more of a simple type of read that presented itself as such. So I'd like the setting of Oracle for personal reasons. I chose it, and I thought that it would present like a nice simple life that Billy was growing up in. And as for Wilmerding, so Wilmerding is a really, really interesting town, and I knew nothing about it before I started the novel. I chose Wilmerding because I wanted a town that was, a certain distance away from Pittsburgh, because I knew that in this particular scene, I needed to show Jimmy Flynn's athleticism and that he could run, a half a marathon rather quickly. And I literally went to a map and pointed at the map and I said, oh, here's a town. It's called Wilmerding. Isn't that a fun name? And there was very, very little on the town when I started to research it, but I did see that the people referred to themselves as dingers at one point. I don't know if they still do or not. But Wilmerding turned out to be really a gem. It was the perfect, setting for that era. It was a company-owned town. It was the first company-owned town in America where a company by the name of the Westinghouse Air Brake Company employed about 85% of the residents in Wilmerding. So it was the perfect representation of difficult times during the Great Depression, because they had to lay off so many of their employees.
They have trouble. The whole town has trouble, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, the coal mines were laying off, the steel mills were laying off as well. There was really nowhere to turn for these poor people in Wilmerding. So you can call it capital welfare, I think is the name that I read, because everybody was reliant on this company to take care of them. And when times were good, it was an amazing place. People were very, very happy there. They had a beautification contest for front lawns, and the owner of the company, he actually was the first one to introduce weekends to employees. He would give them Saturday afternoons and Sundays off, and they had great benefits. They had health benefits and life benefits, life insurance benefits and such. But all of that went south during the Great Depression. So Wilmerding turned out just to be a great find for the novel. I thought it represented the struggles that Jimmy Flynn was going through and his family, because it wasn't just about Jimmy, it was his family. The entire family was, in a state of struggle with with the economic collapse, and that made it very realistic for what the events that transpired, which, as Jimmy tries to rob a coffee shop owned by the mob boss, and Patty feels sorry for the kid and eventually takes him under his wing. So I don't know that I could have written that without the town of Wilmerding as the backdrop.
It's really nice to know that all of those things were real. I mean, you're reading the book and it's a fiction, but I guess it turns out a lot of it is real as well.
I think the sentiments of it are absolutely real. The specifics of it are fictional.
Yeah, exactly. It's there's a certain degree of historical fiction in the book. I think humor is a major theme within the book. It's a humorous novel. Writing humor is a very, very difficult thing to do. But I think it was Jerry Seinfeld that said, things aren't funny unless there's a certain element of truth. And so I think being able to tap into historical element was key to, to making the book have this humorous side to it. And, for that, I think it was a good choice to introduce these things like, the two different towns and the history that they had. And of course, to talk about the history of Boston to a degree, and of course, Pittsburgh in general. So, I thought that was really, really important. All of these things were really important elements to bring into the book.
And what about the humiliating scenarios? I mean, I can't even imagine how you came up with all of these. Even there's one where
I think they all
Billy's with
really
his,
happened to Jeff, and he's just written them into the book.
I mean, it just sounds so like it could happen, but like I can't believe it happened, sort of thing. Especially the one with the Fly Five, when they get into Billy's car. And they were going to go on a road trip and they ended up not going anywhere. And they ended up crashing the car, even though like it left the driveway by like 5 inches. And I just like, it's like, okay, I can see all of those things that you wrote in that sequence of events. It can really happen when you have, 5 guys that are like just fresh out of high school, thinking the way that high school boys might think sometimes. But I mean, I just couldn't believe it. And that was not the only one. That was just like one scenario. I mean, there were a whole bunch of them. So how did you come up with these?
Well, so first of all, that particular scenario was pretty funny, and to protect the innocent and myself. I can tell you that incident may or may not have happened. So I was in college, a group of friends, and when you get a group of nearly adult boys together, it's like a gaggle of geese. I mean, we just walk around and we're not real bright, and we follow each other, and we chirp a lot and whatever geese do. But somebody has an idea and everybody buys in that, hey, this is a great idea. Yeah, that was based on a truism. In college, about 5 of my friends and we decided that we wanted to go to Mexico for spring break. We didn't own a car, so we pulled our money together, and I think we came up with $200, and we bought this old Cadillac, and we decided, well, wouldn't this be better if we cut the roof off?
Convertible,
made it
yeah.
into a convertible.
Yeah, so we turned it into a convertible, and then the spray paint came out. And I have to tell you, I went very soft on in the book on what was written on it, because to be honest with you, we were stupid and we wrote really bad things on this car. And then we proceeded to drive it down to Mexico. And the top speed on this thing was about 35 miles per hour. And we got down to Mexico, and we were having a good time during spring break, as teenage boys will do. And at one point, a federale stopped us and looked at our car, read the things that we had written on the car, and told us to get the heck out of Mexico and go back to Tucson. So, again, life's lessons, not proud, things happen. And again, that's all part of, I guess, pushing the boundaries or finding your boundaries when you're at that age. Other scenarios, Liz, that you pointed out, there's a lot of truisms in much of this stuff. And again, I think that, you do write what you know, and as an author, you certainly embellish on what you know. I guess you'd have to point me towards, one scenario or the other, but I'm happy to comment on them. But for the most part, there's a lot of truth behind every single one of those, scenarios within the book. Not proud.
I think Liz is shocked because she was never a young guy in college.
I was never.
I know exactly what you're talking about, Jeff.
Well, and I think, like, as I said in the beginning, I felt like I had, when I first started to write this book, I felt like I had some exploration to do of my youth. So, and my roots, and of course my imagination. So all of this just kind of tied together. I had fun writing it.
Yeah, looks like you did.
Did your daughters read it yet?
Yeah, my oldest daughter is actually reading it right now, and she's enjoying it.
Okay.
That's cool. Can we have
You
some
might have a
questions for
lot of
you?
I'm going to, yeah, do what dad says, not what he did.
Yeah.
but on a positive note for you as a parent now, I think being a teenage girl is a different experience. I mean, well, like we made stupid mistakes maybe, and maybe did some dumb things, but I don't know. I feel like I always had a healthy fear of law enforcement in general, and getting in trouble. Like I didn't like those things. So
So
Guys do as well. It's just they just forget about it when 5 of them get in a room together. It suddenly becomes
it happens. I think that there's truth in both of those. I've discussed this with my wife a few times, and the way she put it was that she actually feels sorry for teenage boys because they typically don't have the support groups that teenage girls do. They're less vocal. They don't feel like they can reach out and get help. They don't feel like they can have open and candid conversations with their parents. I don't want to say, it's tougher to grow up in that, during that age, that is more difficult than being a woman. It's just different. And that certainly, I think, came across in the book.
I think that's kind of true because, and even like the way that you described your main character, Billy, when he would interact with his very, very overly caring mother, like she wanted nothing more than the best for her son, and was always, trying to make sure everything was okay. And he would just give her like these one word sort of responses. But then on the other side, it seemed like his dad always wanted him to be a man. And so in a way, like he was internalizing that in order to be a man, he needs to like be more tough and not like share his emotions. It almost seemed a little bit like that because every time he would with his mom, he would kind of get a different message from his dad that, that, okay, that wasn't right.
Yeah, it's a confusing time for, a young man. And I think that that's, I mean, everybody has their own experiences, but I know that that's not uncommon, to have a very different relationship with your mom than your dad.
In the story, Billy's a member of the school running team. I think it's the school's running team, which they end up being nicknamed the Fly Five because they're pretty good and they're pretty fast.
Yeah.
They just have a lot of defects, I think. But there's a great dynamic and friendship and sort of teasing among the group. It's very typical of boys in sports teams, I guess. Especially minor sports teams that don't have the jock status, they just have their own status. So they're even more solid because they got nobody outside like worshiping them. How did you get the inspiration for the characters? There was, every single one of those members of the team is a very forceful character or a meaningful character on their own. Were you in a you weren't in a cross country team? Were you in a cross country team when you were?
I was not, but through the years, I've grown to befriend a lot of guys that were in cross country teams, and my wife, she ran cross country in college, and I've met a lot of her friends along the way as well. So Billy, I just wanted Billy to be an average kid. I figured he, with the plot of the story, he had enough going on, and I just wanted him to be like your. I don't even know if there's anything as a normal, teenage boy, but I wanted him to just, be this kind of average kid who happens to have a special gift of running, really fast, of course. But I think, just adolescence is hard enough. And I didn't want him to have to experience anything other than that. I did want to add some color around him. So I thought it was important that he have this relationship with this band of misfits, if you will, which make up the Fly Five. And, these characters, they were, quite frankly, they were crafted from people that I either knew back then or that I know now. I can remember back in college, there was this kid, and in the book, his name is Tuba. And, but this kid would do anything for money. One time we took him to McDonald's, and we bet him $20. No, we bet him $40 that he couldn't eat 20 Big Macs in 1 hour. And he did, because he wanted to make the money.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
and he would also stuff quarters up his nose uh, as a bet. Like, well, I bet you can't stuff, 5 quarters up your nose. Well, sure I can. So these were like real people from my youth. Not every one of them, but that's an example. And some I just thought were interesting characters, and I tried to mix it up a little bit and to surround Billy with colorful, indelible characters that were memorable.
I find that it also represents running well, because you see that in running teams, like running teams are often composed of all kinds of people that if it was just like regular life, like you would never talk to them probably. I mean, like just take me and Alan, for example. Like Alan if I had met Alan at work, I would have never spoken a word to Alan, because he was like a man in a suit that was in charge of an entire company. I would have been the grunt employee, and I would have never talked to him, because I have this, I guess, I feel like not really intimidated by men in suits, but I feel like not
your world.
Yeah, I feel like, we're very different, even though it's just clothing, but it's strange. I probably would have never talked to Alan, but because we run together, we're like good buddies now and have a podcast. So it's really interesting. And I find that your Fly 5 in the book, the cross country team, it was a little bit of that too, because they were all really different, but yet they were all committed to each other when it came to the team, and then they became friends.
Yeah, and that's very true, because after they'd grown up, they weren't really in contact with each other because they didn't have running in common anymore, so they didn't have much in common.
Yeah, I find that that's just the way of life, especially back in the 90s. Liz, I think you'd mentioned something about the 90s and not having social media, and communication was so difficult back then. So it was easy to lose touch with people, especially after you're part of a team, but now you're no longer part of a team. And we all know that a group of guys isn't going to sit down and write letters to each other. So it's easy for them to, they're just probably going to lose touch and hopefully come together at one point down the line. But there's no guarantees, is there? So, but I had a lot of fun writing the Fly 5. They certainly offered some great entertaining moments. I don't see how I could have made or written the book without them. So they were a key element. And the funny thing too about cross country teams and just the hierarchy that exists in high school among the popular groups and such, jocks are typically at the very top. And with one exception, the cross country team. The cross country team, they're not seen on the same
They don't
lap.
count as jocks.
Yeah, it's a very odd dynamic, and so you can have a lot of fun with that as well, because you can be the best runner in the state of Arizona or wherever, the best athlete at your school as a runner, but nobody really knows who you are. It seems like,
or they might stuff you in a locker.
Yeah, it's possible.
You're probably closer to the computer geeks than you are to the jocks.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
So, yeah, and I didn't run cross country in high school. I did play in the band, so that was I don't know where I survived in that echelon, but I think it was it wasn't too high up.
No, 3/4 of the way down by the sounds of things.
So you told us a little bit about writing your book. Do you think that you'll write another one?
Great question. And I think if I do, I think this story is over. However, I could see writing another book through one of the other characters in this one. And, who would that be? I actually think I could see writing a book based on Christmas Day, because here's a guy who has virtually living the dream. He can't lose a race.
Mm-hmm. And it's true, he was a little bit less like, we didn't know him as well. I mean, he was probably developed in your mind, but we only just saw him
Yeah.
because he was winning a race and because he was in the
Yeah, I mean,
newspaper,
I
and
had
he
him,
was
I had him pegged as, having extremely overbearing parents and having a massive expectation placed upon him as a kid. I was thinking, well, that's not going to get explored in this novel, but that'll be his backstory.
It would. I find his story. I think his story would be, greatly entertaining because there was so much expectation placed on him, and then how does he really feel about this, this kid who's challenging him in these races, and because the story is told from Billy Ball's point of view, but if you're Christmas Day, I'm sure you have a very different view of the world, and you've got this irritating character that's chasing you around and tripping you up, and is kind of your certainly his nemesis as well. So you're living the dream, but you can't live the dream forever, and at some point I think that things can crash down, if you have any chink in your armor. So I think if I were to write another novel, it might be about Christmas Day, but I'm not sure. There's a lot of characters in this book. Charlie Simmons.
I really like Charlie.
Charlie was the one I was thinking of when you said who would you write for.
Mm-hmm.
But we do know a couple of key points about her story, so
Yeah.
it's a bit more difficult.
I don't reveal too much about Charlie to actually write a book about her. So loved writing her story as well. I thought she was a good compliment to Billy. She was kind of his rock, and Billy didn't really know who to turn to, and when he was going through all these very stressful situations, but Charlie was always there for him.
Yeah, I kind of loved Charlie and wondered why she wasn't snapped up by somebody else in these sort of interim periods when Billy was having it tough.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I thought about that myself. And I thought that it would complicate the story too much because in the end, this was Billy's story. It wasn't Charlie's. That's not to say that Charlie didn't have a life of her own. And I think that if I were to write another novel involving some of these characters, I might actually bring out a little bit more on Charlie on that through a backstory. Certainly, she went away to college and she had a life of her own. Billy was likely not the boy she was waiting for her entire life, although she might have been. We just don't know that. So yeah, pretty interesting. As far as the characters, one thing that I found that was really fascinating to me as a writer was that once I developed these strong characters, I felt like they started to take over the story for me. There was a point when I remember feeling like a medium to their interactions. And I'm not sure that I fully expected that, but it was really, really fun because when I got these, when I put these personalities together, the way that they interacted told me where the story was going to go at times. And I remember like writing something and smiling or laughing or, practically crying once and going, I didn't see that coming. I just did not see that coming. So I think that was such an interesting part of the writing process, and something that surprised me for sure.
That's amazing. I mean, I've heard that before from authors, but I think what it does is it shows that one, you're invested in your story. Two, you've developed the characters to the extent that you understand them and and that shows in the book when you read the book. And to that extent, you understand them so well, you can just say, okay, well, here's a diner. The door opens, they all come in, and you can just watch what they do in your mind,
Exactly.
and write the story around it.
Yeah, exactly. One of my, which surprised me, I once heard, I don't know if you know the author Lisa C. She's one of my favorite authors, and but I had the opportunity to listen to her a while back as part of a book club, and she actually had it surprised me. She had the opposite view on this. She said she actually felt sorry for her characters because she knew something that they didn't. She knew their future and her characters did not. And it struck me as interesting, and also odd, because I feel the polar opposite. I felt like when I developed the characters, they knew where the book was going to go, and I didn't. So it was a complete reversal of how I thought that this would go. Yeah, just surprised the heck out of me.
Oh, wow. It's a talent to be able to write fiction, because I hear you, just describing the process. And for me, like, I can't imagine doing it. I can't imagine. And, I read the book, and the characters are just really well developed, and, they have personalities, and you can almost like hear voices. And yeah, it all kind of came from your imagination, which I find kind of mind blowing.
Well, thank you, Liz.
So if people want to get themselves a copy of this book, The Humiliation Tour, is there any way you want to direct them?
You can find the Humiliation Tour on any online bookseller like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, a slew of others, I'm sure. Barking Boxer Press, they have their own site, and they can go to that as well and read a little bit more about the book. Maybe get some a backstory on that. But typically when I'm speaking with people and they want a copy of my book, I just direct them towards either Amazon or Barnes and Noble, and that's probably the fastest and easiest way for them to obtain a copy.
And then if people wanted to follow you or learn more about you, is there any way that they can do that?
Yeah, visit me in prison. No, just kidding. I don't know why I said that. Yeah, you can follow the author on Amazon. So I do have my own page on Amazon. You can also follow me on Instagram. Jeff Recker 1, I believe, is my name on Instagram, and then of course just find me on Facebook. I have an author page as well under Jeffrey Recker, and yeah, I'd love to hear from people, and so far things have been really positive. Probably the scariest thing in the world as an author is to go on to Amazon and read book reviews from people you have no idea who they are, and so.
And you never know if they're going to be good or bad.
Yeah, they don't feel they owe you anything. They can just say whatever.
Well, and the thing about writing humor is not everybody's going to share your own humor, your taste in humor. So it's a tough and tricky genre to write. If you're too conservative writing humor, it comes out just boring and flat. If you go overboard too much, I think it's actually can come across insensitive and even abusive at times. I love, like, some of my favorite authors. Jerry Seinfeld, for example. But David Sedaris is probably the master in my mind of writing satirical humor, and he toes the line in every book that he writes. But somehow he just finds that perfect edge, to sit on, and he'll find humor in topics that are just awful, like death and dysfunction in the family, and things of that nature, and things that people would find terribly upsetting if he got it wrong, right? So I'm just kind of blown away by his writing and by other comedic authors. And so this was a tall task to. I didn't really even set out to write a humorous novel. It just kind of started to go that way, and I went with it. I was a little scared at the process, but it turns out that I'm really happy with the outcome of my intention. So very pleased.
I think we were pretty happy to read it, and we think you did a good job out of it. So congratulations for that.
Well, thank you.
Probably what we should do now is just give our summary of reviews, Liz.
Mm-hmm.
And thank Jeff for his time.
You can go first.
My views on the Humiliation Tour by Jeffrey Recker. The story is extremely well crafted, which is what I said at the start. Sometimes things happen and you kind of wonder, why has this happened? Why is this relevant? And then later on, you'll be reading and something else happens which explains the whole thing, or which joins the dots. So there are lots of little aha moments. You go, aha, I see why that person was doing that. I see the relevance of somebody wanting to go on a fishing trip, for example. Jeff will know what I'm talking about here. You listeners won't. You'll have to read the book. So, those little type of aha moments, which make it really fun to read, because you go, oh, that's an interesting thing. I have no idea why it's there, but it's interesting, and there'll be a reason for it. And sure enough, there is later on, which shows the craft, I think. The different values and attitudes of the USA in the 1930s is well portrayed. And, we don't get too deep into the depths of despair of the Depression, but the different attitudes of, sniff this cocaine, it'll make you run faster, that sort of stuff. Or, oh, you should smoke if you're a runner because smoking is good for your lungs, helps you make your lungs strong. That kind of stuff. It's sort of comedic and kind of intriguing at the same time, and crazy. On an entirely different note, the font size in the book, certainly the copy I had, the font size and the spacings in the book are great for an older guy like me. I was actually able to read it without having to use my reading glasses. I'm always on the borderline with my reading glasses. Do I need it for a book or not? And this was like a pleasant read, so functionally pleasant from that point of view. So that was something that doesn't always come up. Lastly, as someone who knows and loves running and actually really knows and loves the Boston Marathon, and being a sucker for a happy ending in a story, I got quite emotional towards the end of the book. I thought it was brilliant the way Billy was racing Boston, and throughout Boston, as somebody who knows Boston, you go, okay, I know where I am there on that part of the race. You describe it. And then you cut away to one of the groups, all these groups of people who've been developed throughout the book. So you cut away to, somebody in a pub watching it on TV or listening to the radio. And then you come back to the race and then you go, oh, I know where I am in the race. And then you cut away to a different group, and each group has their own invested situation in the scenario at the end. And I found that extremely emotional. I got quite sniffly during that almost final chapter, because I also did notice, in case you thought we didn't, that the book has 26.2 chapters, which is a little fun note as well. But that was fantastic. The culmination at the end was really very emotional, very, very rewarding, and congratulations for that.
Well, I'm happy that Alan shed a tear, because now I can say that I probably shed tears at least twice during the book. So it's funny that this is supposed to be so humorous. I guess it just goes to show you that it's a little bit of everything all mixed into one, and the history is fantastic. I don't get to read much fiction, but I really enjoyed this book. And I found that I was engaged right from the beginning. And even though I was a little confused at the start, because you were in 1993 in the first chapter and then 1933. And so at first I was like, wait, did I get the story wrong? But I had written notes with the characters' names. And I'm like, no, I did understand the story in the first chapter. For a lot of the book, I didn't know the stories would be linked. They were really like, for me, I was experiencing them as two separate people's lives. And they both had really interesting characters that you wanted to continue learning about. So I didn't mind that sort of switching back and forth. And I really liked at the end how it all ends up coming together. I like that the cover features a runner, because you can't really tell just by the title that the entire book actually centers around running and around the Boston Marathon. So that was really well done. I would recommend it to anyone that enjoys a good story. The characters start off as young men, which might not seem too relatable to everyone, but if you give it a chance, then I think you'll like it.
So thanks very much for your time, Jeff.
Yeah. Hey, thank you guys. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on, and thank you again. Just remains for us to do the outro.
I guess you want me to do the outro. Okay. I'll do a better job than I did with the
well, that bio. Shouldn't be too difficult. I'm going to leave that in.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. Big thank you to Jeff for providing a review copy of the book and also spending time with us today. If you'd like to leave us feedback about how we can improve the podcast or want to suggest a book that you'd like for us to review in a future episode, please leave us a comment on social media We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter, we are reviews_running. Please also follow us on social media to find out when new episodes are released, or you can just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. If you've been listening to us for a while and are wondering how you can help us out, there are a few ways. If you enjoy the podcast, spread the word, tell your friends about us, or share a link to your favorite episode with a partner. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if this is how you listen to your podcast, or you can also rate us on Spotify out of 5 stars. On Apple Podcasts, you can rate us too, but we really do appreciate when you write a little review. It's always fun to read. We are now on Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy us a coffee, but you can also just follow us and go and watch the other things that we've posted that are running related or sometimes not running related. And you can follow us so that we can send you emails when there's a new posting.
We had a nice little tweet from Cara Goucher last week, and you posted it up there, I see.
I did, because it was the answer to our questions.
Yeah, it's cool. Okay, now you say that's all from Running Book Reviews.
That's all from Running Book Reviews.
Bye.
Bye for now.